Welcome to the Organisational Inclusionist. I'm your host, Grace Masuro. In this podcast series, we'll be delving deep into the pressing issues surrounding equality, diversity, and inclusion in both the workplace and the broader world. My goal is to foster understanding, inspire change, and amplify the voices of those advocating for a more inclusive and equitable society. Throughout this series, I'll be engaging in candid discussions with leaders, experts, activists, and changemakers from various fields. We'll explore the challenges, successes, and evolving landscapes of equality, diversity, and inclusion. From dismantling systematic biases to promoting equal opportunities for all, we'll touch on a broad range of topics. But we won't stop at discussing problems. We'll actively seek out solutions and actionable steps to drive positive change. Our aim is to inspire and empower you, our listeners, to take an active role in making the world a better place for everyone. This is the Organisational Inclusionist. Let's get started. Today, we're joined by Johanne Penney, CEO and founder of Amp Up Your Voice, a progressive anti-racism and diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy, and author of The Roadmap to Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, a guide on how to take positive action and drive inspirational change. Johanne, thank you so much for joining me today in tribute to Black History Month and saluting our sisters. We instantly clicked when we met a few weeks ago, and one of the things we discussed when we met was about the need for more support from our sisters in business. It was such a powerful discussion that I felt it imperative to get on a podcast episode. But before we get stuck in, I'd love it if you could please tell our listeners who Johanne Penney is and a bit more about your new book.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Grace, and thank you for having me on the podcast. My name is Johanne Penney, and I'm the CEO and founder of Amp Up Your Voice, which is an anti-racism and a diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy, which really means we work with brands and businesses who are authentically on their journey to diversify, to increase representation in their workplace, and ensure diverse voices are authentically being heard. And we do that through a range of mediums. So providing expert consultancy on a retainer basis. We create and roll out DE&I strategies or EDI strategies, whatever acronym it is that you use. That is a whole nother conversation, right? And executive mentoring and coaching. So again, those who are really working out, like, are we getting our journey right? Do we have longevity? Are we creating impact? Can we measure that impact and those outcomes? And finally, those who also are navigating systemic barriers to success in terms of that mentoring and coaching piece. And then I'm a culture writer, so I write about all things Black culture. I write for a social media platform called Millennial Femme, and it's all about empowering Black women and being collaborative and working together. And that's really Amp Up Your Voice and what we're doing in the space. Did you want me to talk about my book?
Yes, please.
Right. So, as I said, I'm a writer, and I thought that actually there was a gap in the market in terms of those in the corporate space who wanted a tangible, practical toolkit on EDI. So I have written the roadmap to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really, it's my voice, it's my narrative, but also giving really practical techniques and ideas in terms of how to authentically diversify and ensure that equity in the workplace, and particularly for leaders, like what are some of the things that we can be doing? How do we change processes? How do we look at our recruitment? How do we do data metrics? You know, how do our demographic feel, essentially? So yeah, the book is on the Amp Up Your Voice website, and yeah, that's me for now.
Amazing. Thank you, Jo. All right. So we're both Black women in the EDI space. And that's why I think this conversation is so important, because we essentially are offering a very similar service in the market, but we are still really supportive of each other's work and of each other, which is why we're here today. But we're both Black women in the EDI space and career women in general with some similar lived experiences. Can you share why you think the conversation we're about to have today is so important?
Yeah, the theme for Black History Month this year is saluting our sisters. And I was so happy to hear this theme because, you know, it's what we talk about all the time. Representation counts, and you cannot aspire to be what you can't see. Mm-hmm. And actually, Black women aren't particularly promoted, supported, or collaborated with in a way that other women are. And actually, it's really important that we do that work together, that we do support each other and help each other. And that visibility for people to see is integral to the EDI conversation. So when I'm doing my training, doing my engagement pieces, and I work with leadership teams up and down the UK and internationally, one of the prevailing comments that always comes out is we can't find the talent. The talent is absolutely out there. And I think, even COVID has just been demonstrative of how Black women excel and how entrepreneurial we are. But there are these barriers that are present that we still need to break down. And I think that's the point of this conversation, the recognition that those barriers do exist, that the talent is out there, and how we work together to make sure that we all win. Because when you win, I win. When I win, we all win, right?
Exactly. I love that. What unique challenges do you think Black women face in the business world that necessitate a focus on support and collaboration?
We just don't get it. We just don't get what we deserve. So in terms of, even if you're looking at like funding, Extend Ventures, they did a study over a 10-year period looking at people who are getting seeding funding, and Black women got 0.02% of that funding. So when we're talking about systemic barriers, that's the type of thing we're talking about. Yes, it is the conversations in the office and it is the microaggressions that impact us. But if you're looking at that business world, that corporate world, we have to break down a lot of barriers. Well, there are a lot of barriers to be broken down. It's not all our responsibility.
Absolutely. I think, speaking from my perspective, obviously my consultancy is quite new. It's about 7 months old. And one of the things that I've really struggled with is finding out the things that I don't know and feeling scared to ask questions to my sisters in some instances out of fear of being rejected or them not wanting to support because of, the fear of, well, if I help you, you're now my competition. That is a really unique challenge. Is, I could own all of that and be like, actually, that's my issue. That's my fear. I need to break out of that. But then there's also examples of where some of us will have asked for help from people or women that look like us, hoping that actually, when you win, I win and vice versa. But that's not necessarily a reciprocated view. And, one of the biggest challenges as well that I think we have, and, history shows this, is that Black people in general don't necessarily have the connections that white people have in terms of, experience of business, in terms of experience of how to get funding, how to use tech even to some extent. And that is a massive challenge. Is how do we change that? How do we get the same access? How do we get that equity for founders and for business owners, but Black female business owners in particular?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen is an absolute rise in events and Black women holding spaces for other Black women. And the power of network is undeniable. Going to your point of the fact that we are not as connected, we don't have as many people advocating for us. And that's why I'm really strong on the mentoring and coaching, because we need sponsors. We need people who are in positions of influence and power, who are able to use their privilege to advocate for those who are experiencing barriers, right?
Absolutely.
And but we went to the Hustle and Heels event, what was it, a couple of weeks ago? I mean, what an amazing event, and so many sisters there and so many people connecting and networking. So I think those spaces are really integral to this. But I think there's also being strategic in terms of identifying who are going to be those people who can sponsor you and who can advocate for you. I've always had people in my career who have, advocated for me, pushed me, got me into rooms, and that's really why I'm where I am now.
Yeah.
Because of those people. And that's what we need to learn to do for each other. So going back to what you were saying about, really, it's a scarcity mindset because of the historical context where we're all fighting for our positions and dealing with these barriers. Often we can tend to work in silos or think, oh, this is mine and I'm going to make a success of it. But actually, the amp up your voice values are really about collaboration, the power of network. How do we amplify the voices and lift the voices of others and take them with us? Because there's so much power in working together. There is no power in working on your own. Just vibe with the natural synergy of someone. You don't always have to go in that room wanting something or wanting to take away something, but just be who you are, and actually things will naturally come your way as well.
Absolutely. Can you share some examples of successful Black women in business who have supported each other? Can you share examples of successful Black women in business who have supported each other and the impact that had on their ventures?
Well, if we take our recent example in terms of Hustle and Heels, Jen and Jay, the founders, what they managed to achieve in terms of that event alone, standalone, was incredible. But actually what they did was bring all, lots of Black businesses, Black women together in that event. And actually the March Muses were there. March Muses, who won Dragon's investment from Dragon's Den, who have beautiful Black Christmas decorations. They were there promoting all these other businesses, getting the people to moderate the talks, be on the panels. They were supporting in a very authentic way all of those Black businesses. And I think that's why it was so successful. There was so much power in that room.
How do you feel success stories like the Hustle and Heels event contribute to changing perceptions and encouraging collaboration amongst Black women in business?
I think it's refreshing to really see Black women thriving and being CEOs, being entrepreneurs, smashing it out the park with their amazing idea, their innovative ideas, and having all these businesses, because that's not always been the perception. To be a successful Black woman was kind of an anomaly. And so actually now it's like, again, going back to our point earlier, the talent is absolutely there. We have so much talent. It's just not tapped into or retained, or we're not attracted to certain businesses. But I think all of these success stories are changing those perceptions. Increasing that visibility really helps with representation and propelling other people's careers. And when I do my engagement pieces, I always talk to people about seeing people as individuals rather than as a group. And that's how you can really tap into who people really are. So I think, these success stories all contribute to that narrative.
Definitely. So I've been really lucky to have some great mentors in my career. So one of them being an amazing woman called Abby, who mentored me very early on in my career. And I know how important that was for me personally. How can mentorship and allyship play a role in fostering a culture of uplifting amongst Black women?
As you know, I'm an absolute fan of mentorship and allyship, and we touched on it before in terms of who are those people that can advocate for you, get you into rooms where you not necessarily are invited to, that are in positions of influence, who are in positions of power, that can help you grow your career. And then mentors, I think, are really about growing as a person. Particularly as Black women, we do need to be able to have conversations with people that we aspire to, that are inspiring, that will help us in an often triggering and sometimes traumatic workplace. So it's really important to have people that are going to lift you up as well, support you, just vibe with you. I mentor loads of people, and just to hear their stories, they'll email me and say, "Oh my God, Jo, I've done this. I've just worked with Google. It's from your mentoring. Or, we've worked on this together." All of that is power, and all of that is success, and all of that is amazing. So I always say to everybody, if you are really trying to climb your career, then focus on sponsorship. If you need that support, I think that's a mentor. And then people can be a combination of the two, right? So you can get the skill set from both of them. But I think it's really important for us to have those people around us, because we are dealing with a lot of issues that other people aren't.
Absolutely. I also think for people listening, thinking, well, how do I get a sponsor or a mentor? There are people that you aspire to be like at some point, or that you think you could learn from. Ask the question. It's highly unlikely they'll say no, unless they really don't like you.
Yeah.
Then you have to question what you've done. But traditionally, when you ask someone to mentor you, that is the greatest honor that someone can receive.
Yeah.
We just need to get a bit more confident in doing it, I think.
When I lost my job to racial discrimination and they asked me to sign an NDA and they gave me a financial package, one of the things I tell everybody, and I don't know how I did this because I was completely blindsided, both professionally and personally, so I was not in a good space. But I managed to negotiate in that package a business mentor, and she saved me. And she was a white woman, Emma, but she absolutely saved me. And we walked through from where I was to starting Amp Up Your Voice and what I wanted to do. And she still comes to all of my events. We talk, we speak periodically, but she literally saved me in that situation. So thank you, Emma. And just for everyone listening, like you said, I've never said no to anyone who's asked me to be their mentor. So I think but mentoring is free, by the way.
Yeah.
Sponsorship a little bit different in the corporate environment. I think you do need some money behind that.
I've also had kind of amazing mentors from different backgrounds as well. So at various stages of my career as well. And they have been so powerful in giving me different insight. So I would encourage people as well to think about, obviously you do need that sisterhood, and getting a mentor that understands your journey is really important, but there's nothing stopping you from having more than one mentor. So if you think there is value in having a few, I definitely encourage that from my experience.
Yeah, and I'd like to shout out, I always have mentors. So after Emma, I had another mentor called Jo Valentina Sinclair, and she's a Black woman and she's very spiritual and soulful, and she mentored me for a good year, actually, leading up to Amp Up Your Voice as well. So I think it is also important to have that representation and people who understand your journey as a Black woman as well. But like you said, you can have several people.
So when we initially discussed this topic, we talked about the scarcity mindset, which you briefly mentioned, that can sometimes hold Black women back from supporting each other in business. Can you share your view on that, please?
Yeah, it is what it says on the tin. It's a scarcity mindset. It's being scared to lose something, and it's a negative mindset. So you're scared that something is going to be taken away from you if you're helping others or collaborating with others or lifting others, because you're holding on to whatever it is that you have. And actually, there is a really, like I said, a negative mindset, because actually you're in a minus, you're working by yourself, you're rolling by yourself. And actually, like we've been saying the whole of this conversation, there's so much power in having a growth mindset, where establishing, identifying where you can help others, where you can work together, where you can collab on things, makes you hugely successful. But so for me, and it's quite obvious when people are practicing a scarcity mindset, they're very insular. They don't want to share information or knowledge. They might just take a disliking to you for no apparent reason. All of those things are practicing a scarcity mindset. And I think that does hold a lot of Black women back.
Absolutely. And I think, that's one of the reasons that I was really keen for us to get this session on, because I see Black women, our sisters, doing some amazing pieces of work internationally. And there's so much that we can learn from each other. And I get where the scarcity mindset comes from. We haven't had the access that we have today for very long. And it takes getting used to. It takes getting used to what it feels like to be present in those rooms, to hear those conversations, to have that access. And when you're in rooms where most of the time you might be the only Black woman in a senior leadership team, for example, there can be that feeling that I can't let anyone else in this room because there's only space for one of us. And if I let somebody else in, that might mean that I'm kicked out. And I talk about this a lot, about experiences of us sometimes getting into rooms and like shutting and padlocking that door behind us. Like, I'm in, no one else can enter until I'm ready to leave. We need to get out of that mindset. There's so much power, like you said, in collaboration, in having each other's backs and raising each other up, celebrating each other's work, because we all have very different networks as well. So if you're sharing your knowledge and your information, and you're connecting with new women and new Black women and sisters and saluting them, you're then getting exposure to a completely different network as well. So, I'm always really big on what's in it for us. Like, what people always want to know, what's in it for them. And I think that is a massive thing that's in it for them. Not only do you get the reward of knowing that you've supported a sister and you've saluted a sister, but you also could end up benefiting, business wise, because of that new sister in your life and their network or their way of life or how they think and what you can learn from them. So I really encourage that as sisters, we do better. Some of us are doing some amazing stuff. Like, I'll shout you out, Jo, because the first time I met you, you came and found me kind of queuing for some food and just started talking to me, which for someone who, I'm quite socially awkward sometimes. So for me, that was massive. But you were so warm, you were so honest, you were really transparent about what you're doing. Even when I told you that I was working in a similar space, you were still so encouraging and so warm. And that's why I wanted us to have this conversation, because I think that, as Black women, we need to see more of that. We need to see women embracing each other and supporting each other. There is so much business in the world. Like, there is nothing that's going to take away what's meant to be yours. And I think more of us need to see things that way. As if it's meant for me, it will be for me. And if it's not meant for me, then it won't be for me.
Absolutely. And just holding the joy and the positivity that comes from being able to do that with your sisters, right? Yeah. Like, we have quite a few Amp Up Your Voice events. I can't tell you the amount of people that have met, and women and Black women that have met at my events and have gone off to work together, and I'm cheering on from the sidelines. I'm like, yes,
exactly.
They're doing this together, they're doing that together. Because you know what? It always comes around. It always comes around. You have to have that energy. Like, you have to give that energy to get it back. And I always find it always comes back around to me, because I genuinely want people to be their best. I genuinely, like, when we met, I'm just like, who's this woman? She looks amazing. I love her hair. And then when you told me you were doing EDI, I was like, what? We need to do something. Like, I felt so inspired, and, it speaks to my personality, who I am as a person anyway. But I think, if we can practice that a lot more, then, we're also really strong together. And that helps to have those safe spaces and to lift each other up. I've had Black women shut me down or, do awful things because I've said, oh, can you share an example of maybe some of the stuff that's gone on your business that maybe we can use for Amp Up Your Voice? And that's created a whole thing. And I'm always really taken aback. So I'm like, oh, I don't understand. I don't understand why sharing, and like you said, being collaborative, sharing that information, that knowledge, why that's a negative. I really don't get it. And I could give you so many examples of Black women who have that padlock swinging and they're ready to shut that door. But for me, it's about that long-term journey. Look at the gold standard, where we want to be, and then think about how we're going to get there. Because often we can see where we want to be, but the reality of what it takes is very, very different. So I would just salute all our sisters and say, come on, let's get this. We can do this together.
Absolutely. I had an interview a few years back for a role, and the person that was interviewing me, he was this amazing guy who I'd met before. I think we'd had like a first interview. Brilliant guy, just really warm, really passionate about what he does, about what he wanted to do with the team. And he invited me for a second interview. And he also invited a Black woman. He was a white man. He invited a Black woman just so that he could make it an inclusive panel. And it was, I thought that was brilliant. I was like, I love that, inclusivity, brilliant. And I turned up for the interview, and from walking into the room, I could tell that there was an issue. Not from his perspective, but from the Black woman's perspective that was there to support for the interview. He asked me some brilliant questions, like really getting to know me and who I was, what I'd bring to the table, etc. And one of the things that I love interviews. I think, and I say this to everyone when I'm coaching people, I'm like, don't be nervous at interviews. How often do you get to sit in a room and talk about yourself, sometimes for an hour, and people actually listen? Like, they want to. I love that. So
I love interviews too, by the way.
So I love interviews. I always do really well in interviews. But every answer that I gave in this interview, he loved the answers. He was really positive. But the lady that was there supporting would ask kind of contentious questions to almost trip me up, or to kind of, rile me up a little bit. And I could see what she was doing. So my responses were always really measured. But there came a point at the interview, and I always believe interviews are they should be a two-way thing. So they're not just about the company that's interviewing you deciding if they want you. They're also about you deciding if you want to work for that company. And they came to a point in that interview, based on the interaction that I was having with the Black woman in the interview, that I decided I can't work here. I can't work with you.
In the interview, you knew, yeah.
I knew, because for some reason she seemed like she didn't want me in her space, in that space with her. And she was the only Black woman in the senior leadership. And I could just tell that she wasn't ready for me to enter that space with her. And I was really comfortable with that, because I also believe life is really short. And if you're going to do anything, be happy doing it. And I wasn't about to leave where I was to go into a space where I wasn't wanted. So I left that interview feeling sick, actually, because I was like, that was horrible. You know, the man that interviewed me was amazing. To this day, I still respect him and I think he's brilliant. But I felt sick from the way that I was made to feel by a woman that I should have been able to look up to. And when I got the feedback from the agency that sent me for the interview, they said he absolutely loved you, but he asked the woman that interviewed with him for her thoughts, and she said she wasn't sure you were ready.
Wow.
And that blew my mind and broke my heart all at the same time, Joanne, because I'd sensed it in the interview. If they'd offered me the job, I would have turned it down based on that interaction. But to hear that feedback directly, not only affirmed that my doubts were right in that they didn't want me in that space, but it broke my heart, because we should never be doing that to each other. You know, as women, and I'm a mum, you know, to a beautiful black daughter. And my aspiration in doing the work that I do now is that when she's ready to enter the world of work, it looks very, very different to the way it looked when I entered. And I think that's why conversations like the one we're having today are so important as well, because I absolutely love Black women. Like, I love them.
Me too.
To the max.
Yeah.
But I do know that as Black women, to get to where we are destined to get to, and to be what we should be to each other, we need to have more of these conversations, and we need to get better at calling each other out on it and challenging each other. In the same way we talk about calling out instances of racism or discrimination, let's get a bit more comfortable with calling out or calling in our sisters when we need to do better.
But I think it's what you just said, it's really hard to articulate when it's happening. And I think we're always blindsided because we don't expect it. You don't expect it from a Black woman. You expect from, on a very basic level, you and I both have an understanding of who we are, where we are now, and how we've got there, and what we've got to look forward to, and some of the barriers that we will be experiencing in the future. That's just from the basics, you know, let alone all the other stuff. And like you said, you knew the energy in the room. But I always find it hard. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I always find it hard to articulate when that's happening. So I'm like, is this really happening? Am I sure this is happening? And like you said, once you heard the interview feedback, then it you know, confirmed that you were right. But I do think we do need to get better and better understanding when it's happening. Like you said, confidence to call that out. But it's a very tricky landscape. It's very difficult to navigate.
It is. In what ways do you think Black women can navigate systematic barriers and biases in the business world while also supporting one another? Because when we talk about that scarcity mindset, it's a learned mindset. It's come from the systematic barriers and biases that we faced up until now and still face to a certain extent. So what ways do you think we can navigate those barriers and biases to effectively support each other in the future?
I think it's really about the business have to work out whether there's systemic barriers and biases, and they are the ones that need to address, dismantle, deconstruct any bias or discrimination or racism that is manifested within their space. I think on a people level, for Black women, you know, like you said, navigating those systemic barriers, it's about support. It's about, you know, providing those safe spaces where we can have honest conversations, like you just said, share experiences to work out how to tackle issues going forward. All of those things together make you very powerful. So I think it is about how that interaction, that personal interaction, and supporting and lifting each other up, and having those conversations essentially.
What steps do you think can be taken to create a more inclusive dialogue around saluting and supporting our sisters in business?
I mean, for Amp Up Your Voice, I forgot to mention in the beginning that I'm actually a speaker as well. So I do quite big talks for wide audiences, and they seem to be very impactful in terms of creating a more inclusive dialogue. So actually, you can get all the people in the business. One, they've got the representation of me being a Black woman standing there in front of them saying all this stuff. So that's the first step. And then it's that engagement piece. And I think those events and that networking and that understanding of people and that interaction, rather than, like I was saying before, sometimes if we see people as groups, then actually those stereotypes are coming out far, thick and fast. But actually, if we see people as individuals, it makes us really able to mitigate our bias and understand where we might, challenge our perceptions and understand where we might be holding some stereotypes. So I think, the steps, they're quite practical steps, but having those talks, having those engagement pieces, holding those events where everybody is included and invited. And actually, that's quite a hot topic at the moment with a lot of clients that I'm working with, is like, we're having all these events, but actually we recognise that sometimes they're not inclusive. We might have loads of alcohol there, or, we're not catering for working parents, or there's no disability access. So they're having to really think in more granular detail, how do we make it inclusive? So it's not just having a conversation on ED&I, it's tangible steps that you can take as an organisation or as a person to create that change and that change movement.
I think for entrepreneurs, especially, Black female entrepreneurs, one of the things that I've struggled with is getting, information, like basic things, like, how do I use Zoom effectively? For certain types of things, like really basic things. And I know that one of the things that has really benefited me is having a sister circle of entrepreneurs that I can contact with those really basic questions. And I think, one of the big things that I'm really keen to see in this space is more Black female networks of entrepreneurs that, offer mentorship, offer support, because, mentorship could look and feel different for every single person. It doesn't necessarily need to be an older person mentoring a younger person, for example.
No.
And it also doesn't necessarily need to be, a call for an hour every single week. Each mentor has different needs, but I think seeing more mentorship programs or mentorship offers from sisters in the business world would be amazing. And there may well be some already that I'm just not aware of. So if there are any, and to any listeners that think, actually, we've got loads, please do let me know. Like, send me a DM or drop me a comment as part of this post. But I'd just love to see more of that. There's so much we can learn from each other. So
absolutely. It's just about learning from each other. So I think you're right. It's like, how do we do that in a way that's comfortable, that's enjoyable, that's inspiring, that's supportive? I do see quite a lot popping up. So I will send you some as well. But I always find that sometimes they're quite sort of niche. And it's like, how do we connect them all together? So it's almost like a membership, but you have to get in.
Yeah.
I don't know if you found that.
I find that, like, they're very sector orientated, like Black women in tech, for example. And I'm not in tech, but I'm not being funny. I've gotten to the point now where I'll just rock up anyway.
I'm a seasoned event goer.
I'm here. Let's talk about tech.
I can do Zoom.
I can't do Zoom. Talk to me about that.
I can't.
So I'd just love to see more of that. So I feel like we've given some already, but I like to end each episode with a call to action for anyone listening that identifies with what we've talked about. What actionable steps can listeners take to actively support and uplift Black women in business going forward?
So I think in terms of actionable steps and uplifting Black women in business, really thinking about how you show up on a day-to-day basis and how you professionally engage the people within your business that need support. And like, we're all time precious. So, sometimes it's really easy just to go to the same people, who's going to the juicy conferences, who's doing the talk, who's been invited to the networking event. are we sending the same people out over and over again, or are we representative? Are we looking at people's careers and working out how we can support them in a very practical way to climb those careers, and thinking about, in your position of influence and power, how do you use that to advocate for others? So one of the things I think is also really key is, if you see people, if you are in a room of power or influence, and you see there's underrepresentation, then how do you get those people into those rooms? How do you have the confidence to navigate that conversation and actually step up and call it out and say, we need representation here? So really thinking about, on the ground, those sort of issues, I think that will really start to create that, authentic, inclusive dialogue.
Absolutely. I think my call to action to individuals would be that, we've talked about a few instances of where we may have experienced not necessarily the most positive interactions with one another. And we've also talked about where we've had amazing ones. So we've got or have had some amazing Black women mentor and support us over our careers.
Yeah.
But I think my biggest call to action to kind of Black women listening to this is, don't let your past engagements dictate your future interactions. And that's something that I've had to really work against as well, is not allowing previous negative experiences to stop me from reaching out or asking for help or connecting, is actually letting those biases go and those previous experiences go, and not allowing them to hold you back from building new relationships. And similarly, if you've ever been a Black woman who maybe hasn't made space for another Black woman in a room, appreciating that for yourself and just committing to doing better and doing differently in the future would be my biggest call to action. We're all learning this, the progress we've made over the last few years has been amazing, and I've witnessed it as a millennial, but there's still so much more that we can do, and we need each other to do that.
Absolutely. That was a fantastic call to action. I love it.
Thank you. Jo, I have really, really enjoyed this conversation. I love that we met, and I love that, we will be doing things together in the future. But just thank you so much for being available for this conversation and just adding so much value to it. I think the more that we have conversations like this, the more we as women, as Black women, as women of colour will come together, so that we can be in a space where we aren't just saluting each other on theme months like this Black History Month, where the theme is saluting our sisters, but we are consistently saluting each other and raising each other up and supporting each other. And I really encourage everyone to go out and get Jo's book, drop any comments or thoughts that you have. Thank you so much again, Jo.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you for starting off this conversation and having that transparency, because I think that's hugely important. And until the next time, but thank you so much.
This podcast is brought to you by Acquaintance Consulting. We'd love it if you could take a minute at the end of this podcast to follow, subscribe, whichever is easier or available for you on the platform that you're listening to us on. We're really keen to grow this channel and really impact equality, diversity and inclusion across the world. And with your support, we can do just that.